welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Techy, a podcast all about leading edge tech, where we're here to talk about all that's strategic and high level and thought leadership. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, how do we actually apply any of this in real organizations? Because in real organizations, it's firefighting, it's conflicting requirements, it's politics, it's a whole bunch of stuff going on that has nothing to do with any of that highfalutin stuff. So I'm VP of Research, John Collins.
I'm Howard Holton, CTO.
And we're going to cut through it all and make sense of it. Let's do it.
Okay, normally you just start, I just start talking in the middle of the intro, but the intro went so far off script, I didn't even know what was happening. I didn't know if we were just going to start.
No, I know, but that's literally my frustration. I mean, I'm just like kind of, why are we even here? It's like there's so much that people need to know and understand that they just get faced with a wall of white papers and a sea of webinars and
constant alerts and updates and security issues, and then what's happening just kind of generally in the world, right? I like the kind of threads about Thread. If you've paid attention, right? The new Meta Twitter competitor.
Oh yeah, the Threads thing. Yep.
Fastest app to some number of hundreds of millions of users, being bandied about as though it matters because everyone on Instagram that logs in, gets prompted to join Thread, and then if you do that and you delete your Thread account, you delete your Instagram account. Did you see that?
So it's kind of...
So it is Instagram.
Inevitable. Yep.
It's Instagram. So you can't... The time where you can have one but not the other is rapidly diminishing. And I do have to say, anyone that trusts Meta with more of their data, well, contact me. I have a bridge to sell you. Right?
Yep.
They're not a company I find to be trustworthy at all. And if I didn't mention it in one of our other podcasts, please read Cory Doctorow's The Inshitification of the Internet, where he talks about how this process happens that we're all kind of stuck in, right? I think we've all said or heard, if you're not paying for it, you are in fact the product, right? And he kind of talks through the evolution of those things that we kind of consume, get, and enjoy for free, and how they become more and more terrible over time, and how that's actually kind of an inevitable design, as it were. And the companies that avoid that are rare, few, and far between. So far, Discord's one of the few that's been able to avoid that.
I mean, completely relevant to the topic at hand. The thing that I find most frustrating is, A, I'm the product, and B, I'm paying for it in time. So I cannot do anything. I can't even go on and kind of respond to an email or something like that without 1,000 other things all calling on it. And suddenly it's like if you walk into a library, you want to go and get a book, sit down and read it. You don't want to go in, find out that there's a coconut stall next to you. Oh, and by the way, we're going to take your kidney out. It's just, there's just so many other things going on that are constantly distracting, even as I try to do something, which means I'm working at my least efficient. I think that's how they get us.
Well, I find the only way I can get anything done is to extremely time box what I do and hyper focus, right? Like right now, do not disturb is on. My phone is not near me. This is full screen. I will get no interruptions should get no interruptions during a podcast. I can't do anything about real physical interruptions, someone banging on my door, as an example, but I don't expect to have any of those. Otherwise, getting nothing done becomes the getting things done, right? It's a terrible, awful kind of, world of micro interruptions that we live in. And I think that extends into kind of the enterprise, right? If you have a strategy, how do you get anything done in that strategy when you're trying to coordinate a fleet of battleships, as it were, right? Without the training systems in place and and everyone has their job, but for the most part don't really understand how their job connects to everyone else in the organization.
And everyone's faced with those micro distractions. So we've got it at a personal level, we've got it at a departmental level, and then we've got it at a corporate level where, patch management, changes of strategy, Kubernetes suddenly coming out of the ether and saying, oh, well, you're building everything wrong anyway, so you need to completely restart, yada, 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 yada. And that's just in tech. There's all the stuff happening outside of tech as well. Oh, we need this new tool. Oh, we need marketing. You need SEMrush. You need this. You need that. You need the other tool. Oh, they're not compatible. So you spend the whole time.
Or they're automated until they're not. Right?
How do you mean?
I mean, the automations work fine. The data exchanges work fine. Everything works fine until it doesn't. And it seems like that then becomes the thing that you constantly work on. Right?
It is
fixing the things that were supposed to make my life easier or make us more efficient or more effective then becomes the job rather than being more efficient and more effective.
We should be building things, not fixing things, for sure.
Yeah. And we spend a lot of time fixing things.
It's a good job I'm not a conspiracy theorist, or I think that's what they wanted all along.
Well, what's interesting is when you talk to vendors and you go, hey, we're not seeing the returns that we expected, what vendors say is, well, you didn't configure it correctly. You didn't build it correctly. You didn't deploy it correctly. You're not using it correctly. And I'm not saying that they're saying that because it's a brush off. It's really not. Certainly not in every case, right? So let's just assume that it's not, because they're right. Right? What is the best way to configure it? What is the best way to do this? What is the proper way to do this? And do we understand our use case on day 90 well enough in day negative 90 to architect it properly and design it properly and deliver the right instructions and have the right knowledge, right? Versus how much just kind of organizational drift occurs in that kind of 180-day period.
That's my wife shutting the door because I like to lack distractions as we're doing this thing. So, case in point. So, but what I mean, where do you fix it? Do you fix it by just saying stop the wall, I want to get off as an enterprise, or do you fix it by kind of starting at the top or at the bottom or in the middle, or
So I think if we were to kind of give some advice, I think it's kind of three buckets. The first is you need alignment, right? You need to make sure that everyone on your team, from all the way at the top to all the way at the bottom, has a clear set of kind of operating strategy, right? What is the vision and what is the goal? And everyone should kind of be able to repeat that all the way up and down. There should be alignment in those things. The second one I would say is we need to understand and value the benefit of the early work, right? Our architecture should take longer than it does. If you find you're constantly fixing things or you're not getting the benefits that you thought you were going to get, you likely didn't spend enough time on the pre-sale side and have probably spent most of your time on the post-sale side, which is the wrong way that equation should work, right? If you're answering questions post-sale, you didn't do enough due diligence and proper design and architecture work on the front end. And as an organization should look at your priorities, right? Because the more time I spend making sure that the design is correct, the more likely it is to be correct. Now, that doesn't mean analysis paralysis is good. And at some point you have to declare this is good enough and let's move forward, right? Perfection's the enemy of progress. And so I think that comes to the point where you've either achieved an 80th percentile and that's good enough, or you have yet another call about it, no decision is made, and then you determine that that's enough, right? At some point you still do have to move forward, but at the same time, especially as a leader, right, you should be looking at that and going, okay, we've moved forward on this. I don't know that the team is confident. How do we resolve that lack of confidence and make sure that we're asking the right questions and have the right people in the room moving forward?
I mean, that does it is kind of a thought in time saves nine, isn't it? It's uh, and the point about the 80%, it's not that 80% is the best possible you can do. It's that if you're working in a way that you're not doing the 80%, you're just trying to do a whole bunch of things and you don't even understand what you're doing, then you're wrong. And so to get to 80% of right is far better than to get to 100% of just complete chaos.
It's even far better than being right 20% 5 times within the same project, because the space in between those 20% is going to be extremely wrong, even if you think you've covered 100%.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yep. And I think that, I mean, that's from a tech perspective. It's the old Death Star analogy of, we're forever looking at the surface and never kind of drilling into the middle. And most organizations, I wish I could still find it, and I think the group was called Large Scale Complex Computer Systems Society or something like that, and they reveled in having these massively complex architecture diagrams of the kind of, I mean, not in terms of this is what stuff should look like, but more gleefully going, this is what stuff actually looks like. I remember the one of the NHS, and it was just this kind of, oh my goodness, it was like the worst possible dystopian city.
Sure.
And that's the reality of the NHS. That's why we can't change healthcare, because, well, that and the cauliflower principle of medicine. But there's so much data in so many different pockets that we can't sync.
But,
and privacy.
And I think a lot of that comes from this fundamental idea that we're in the application game and not the data game.
Ooh, pick that apart for me, Howard.
Well, if my job is to maintain an application, because an application allows access to the data, and that's what I do, then I will keep an application around long after its life has kind of run its course, its value has run its course, and then that becomes yet another silo of data that I have to work with and rectify and carry forward. And then I bolt on something else to try to get more value from that application. Then I bolt on something else to try to get value. And then I stand up another application because that application doesn't actually do the thing that I need now, which then has its own silo of data, versus looking at it the other way. If my job is to manage the accessibility and lifespan of data, the application is only as valuable as that point in time, right? Then I can constantly look at what is the right interface to present this data in the way that is the most useful, right? It also means I never have ego attached to the decision that was made for that application, because it doesn't actually matter. The application doesn't matter. The application was valuable only in the point and time necessary to provide access to the data in a way that was useful at that point in time. And as things change and evolve, then it's no longer, why did you choose this application? We no longer even ask the question. We just say, what is the right application for today? And that defensibility that comes along just goes away.
I mean, interestingly, because we always used to talk in terms of three-layer models, and keeping the data separate from the business logic, separate from the user logic. But what you're applying is the additional hubris that comes with having built something really nice, and it's my application, it's my data, etc. And I know a few DBAs that are going to get upset as I say this, but they'll probably never listen. I'm not going to tell them. So the data layer is boring. It should be. It's literally, it should be well structured. Whether it's SQL based or not, it should have a modicum of structure, and it should just be about scalability. It should just be about kind of access to that data in a reasonable time frame.
It should have exactly the friction required to apply governance and quality, and no more. Right?
And then leave the cool stuff for the other stuff, but keep the data layer clean.
Well, and I think that's where we start to make mistakes in cloud native and application modernization, right? When we start talking about containers and containerization, I still hear a lot of conversation around application centricity, which of course causes me to laugh, because the whole point of containers is there are no longer monoliths, so we can swap out the pieces that don't work today, regardless of whether they worked yesterday, for something more efficient today, without having to rewrite the entirety of the application. In which case, what we're actually building is data centricity or user centricity, but not application centricity.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to me that it's the personality types almost of the people doing it. So data people are very kind of obviously I'm speaking in massive generalizations and sweeping stereotypes, but data people are quite structured. It kind of goes with the territory. Application people are more caring about making stuff happen, and functionality and that kind of stuff, which also makes sense. But then the application people think that data is less important, and the data people think that the application is less important, and they don't really talk to each other. So the whole notion of statelessness came out of the microservices world as like kind of, well, data doesn't matter anymore. It's just kind of these ephemeral bits of knowledge that are flying around our microservices architecture in a cool way. And it was companies like Portworx that came along and said, well, you're going to find out you're wrong, and we're going to make money out of it. So hooray! And sure enough, they succeeded quite well at that. But it's just, of course, data matters, and it doesn't. The notion of a distributed data store is still really, really hard to lock down. And or as the application people call stateful. What even is a distributed data store? You either have it all in one place, or you have it kind of synchronized between multiple places. But I could speculate about it, but I'm pretty confident that no one's really solved for that properly right now.
I don't know that anyone has adequately defined the problem in a way that makes it solvable either. Right? Like I think everyone that said we solved for it was solving for a specific aspect of massively distributed data sets that were specific to how they wanted to solve for massively distributed data sets, but didn't solve the problem of massively distributed data, which is a very different thing than data sets.
Ooh, I think we're onto something here, Howard.
Right.
But the whole, if you start actually drilling into the politics of data and the kind of the stakeholders involved in the what data should be and where it should exist and so on and so forth. So you've got the hyperscalers; they don't care about data apart from they want it all. So hence very cheap to get it in and very expensive to get it out in the hyperscaler world, and that does build on. It is predicated on the idea that data will be centralized. But actually, the dilemma is that data is inevitably distributed across multiple providers and SaaS providers and legacy systems and so on.
Well, it's only centralized because it's the only way we can make it work. Right? The truth is, it starts decentralized. It starts massively distributed, and it's our inability to use it where it's created to the level of efficiency, reliability, resilience, protection that forces us to then consolidate the data somewhere.
I've got a funny feeling that if we extrapolated this conversation 5 minutes forward, we'd go around a buoy that we've been around many times before, and we just realized, yep, this problem still isn't solved, which is the whole notion of distributing data and how you keep it in sync and how you keep master data management challenges and enterprise architecture challenges and so on and so forth. It was not solved before, and it's certainly not solved for the cloud.
No, for sure, right. There are two projects I think that are working very hard to try to solve it. The first is Web 3, whatever that looks like, right? And then the second is the HBO show Silicon Valley, right? The premise to the application that the guys developed the show was all about that massively distributed data storage network, whatever you wanted to call it. Yeah. It's odd.
I'm just trying to think if Neil Stephenson stumbled upon the. I know he had a finance system in one of his books, didn't he? So
he did.
the science fiction writer. If
Oh,
anyone
yeah.
hasn't read Neil Stephenson, they should.
If anyone hasn't read Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, you absolutely should if you're listening to this podcast, where he created the metaverse in 85, 6, or 7. After talking to researchers at, I want to say, like Cal Poly or one of the California universities, maybe Berkeley, that was doing some research into artificial intelligence and kind of future state networking, where they really laid out this virtual VR internet. And he coined metaverse, which he did not trademark or copyright, and purposefully did not. So for those who think that Facebook invented the metaverse, they are attempting to copy what Neil Stephenson laid out almost 40 years ago.
I mean, Facebook inventing is kind of a bit of an oxymoron already, isn't it?
I mean, Apple inventing is the same oxymoron, right? One of the companies we think of as being this big, and most people think of as being this big invention company, it couldn't be farther from it. I would argue they're an innovation company, but not an invention company.
My take on Apple was they were very, very good, and Steve Jobs was very, very good at going, no, we need to throw everything away and do that thing, because that's the thing that's going to make the difference. It wasn't their thing necessarily. They made it look cool.
Well, that's why I think they're an innovation company, not an invention company, right? Invention being the initial creation of a thing. Right? I think everyone knows what invention is. Innovation being the application. Innovation being the application of an invention to a ready market. Right? They didn't invent the MP3 player. They waited until they saw that there was a market, that the market was ready for it. The market was poorly met. Market needs were poorly met by the existing devices, and they created the iPod, right? Which changed how we consume music completely, right? The iPod created the death of the album and the advent of the single.
Yeah. Like, could they kind of create the podcast as a kind of spin-off?
No,
As a kind of
really.
law of unintended consequences of the iPod.
Yeah. Well, although I think they likely enabled it more than anything.
Exactly.
Right. It's that kind of enabling of technology goes back into that maybe innovation bucket.
So hang on. You said there's 3 things, and I think we got to 2.
So we got to 2. The third is ensuring that your operating model is in sync with your vision, strategy, and goals. Right? If your operating model runs the same way it did in 2010 that it does today, and today you want to cloudify your things, whatever that means to you, that operating model is not going to support that. Right? If your infrastructure teams are siloed and your software development teams are siloed, and you have this small group doing DevOps, you're going to find it hard to be cloud forward, cloud first, cloud second, cloud whatever, modern, as it were.
I've seen it. It was a bit like the DevOps team hit the wall of antibodies that the corporate body created, and it just kind of surrounded them with proteins and spat them out.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, if your operating model is business as usual, you're doing it wrong. Right? Your operating model should be continually and constantly in a state of willing evolution, if not executing evolution. You should be willing to make changes there in as much as you're willing to make changes anywhere. And you should create a culture of embracing that change, which that culture comes from that operating model.
And that brings full circle to the alignment piece, which continuous alignment.
Because culture eats strategy for lunch,
said Peter Drucker.
I'm not sure who said it.
I think
you're better at that than I am by far.
I think I just stole someone's great cartoon of it in many of my PowerPoints, so it's kind of seen his name often enough. I think it was for breakfast, actually. But yeah, Culture eats strategy for lunch, said Howard Holton.
Yes. I actually think lunch is a better meal.
Some people skip breakfast. I mean,
I skip breakfast. I'm never prepared for a breakfast meal. But by the time lunch rolls around, I've got enough of my faculties working. I can make something that people would
it
want
does
to eat.
make a more complex kind of little phrase when you say, well, culture eats strategy for breakfast, apart from if you don't eat breakfast, in which case it needs to wait for lunch, where you might be a bit hungry, and I mean, you gotta get out at that point.
That's true. That's true.
But all of that seems to start. I mean, I'm a great because it's easy to kind of sit and kind of muse on what to do. But back when I had a proper job and I was firefighting and so on and so forth, both the best thing I ever did and the worst thing I ever did was to kind of step out of the fires for a while and just stop and think and draw and have that ability to kind of work out how to do it right, and then you can step back in with something. It was the best thing, because otherwise I'd just have been a hollow shell. But it was the worst thing because it started to feel very attractive, and I spent probably more time. It kind of outstayed its welcome, if you like. Oh, I like this, not doing fighting the fires. So even as fires were raging, it was kind of well, yeah, okay, I'll be right back.
I will say I've solved more fires by stepping away than I have by firefighting.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And there's like a law of diminishing returns or something, right? Where the longer you fight a fire without taking a break, the less likely you are to solve it. Kind of thing, right? Like if you can solve a fire within the first hour, work the hour. Like always work the first hour. After the first hour, I think it's probably break time. Right? Like take 30 minutes and step away. Take 30 minutes and go to another room with a different whiteboard and whiteboard out the problem from end to end, including everything you learned in the last hour. Right? The number of times I've found a solution to the problem standing outside on the steps watching someone else smoke, because I don't smoke, but so it was a way in my early career to get out of the building. I distinctly remember I was fighting this problem back in the Novell days, right? Novell 3. I was fighting a login script problem all morning. Right? Nobody could work. None of their drives were mapped. They didn't have a clue what a UNC path was. I wouldn't want to explain it. The entire system was effectively down. Right? They could not work. The business was down. And I've been fighting for hours. And my business partner said, "I'm going outside to smoke," because he was not the technical guy. And so I went, well, I'm going to take a break and come out. And I went outside and I sat down and I just went, and I put my head in my hands and I went, oh my God. As soon as I closed my eyes, I could actually see the script that I'd been banging on. And I went, oh my God. And this was back in the days where you had an old CRT monitor that was not color. Right? So each block was like this big and kind of fuzzy. And so I went, oh my God. And I stood up and I went in and I walked into the room, and he throws the cigarette down and follows me in and he goes, what? And I walked over to the server, whatever interface I was using to communicate with it, right where I had the screen up. I unplugged the keyboard. I went to another desk. I unplugged the keyboard. I plugged the keyboard back in, and I replaced all of the semicolons with colons because the shift key was broken. And where I thought I was putting colons, I couldn't see that they were in fact semicolons the whole morning. And until I closed my eyes and got that kind of inner view, I got to look at it differently, I didn't know that they were semicolons. And I just went, it can't be that. This got to be my imagination. No, the shift key had been broken all morning, and I did not know that I had been putting semicolons where colons were necessary.
And you just couldn't see it because you didn't have the distance.
Yep. And all the semicolons were, of course, had spacing. And so those were easy to see that they were proper semicolons. But the colons were, because they were drive mappings, were butted up against other things. And because it was kind of fuzzy and my eyes were going blind after being up for 36 hours getting the new update done, I could no longer see that those were not, in fact, colons.
Analogy for enterprise strategy.
Yeah, take a break.
Take a break. And I think that's it should be baked into the week.
Yeah.
Of not taking it the kind of active breaking, not taking kind of power naps in order to kind of think better, but just kind of falling back and taking thinking breaks, if you like.
One thing I found that really helps is not every meeting requires you to be on camera and in front of your desk. Go for a walk. Right? If you're not actively speaking and actively presenting and reacting to what somebody else has shared, where you need the larger screen, go for a walk. Just walk around your neighborhood. Right? Walk around the block. Walk and get a coffee. Right?
Actually, there's a true analogy, and possibly one I'll have to leave it. We'll have to leave it on, but from me, and give you the final word. But when I go for a walk, because I'm not thinking straight, I have to keep walking until I am thinking straight, and I'll walk and walk and walk, and there's a moment at which I will sigh, at which point my wife will go, "There we go," and it could be 15 minutes, it could be 40 minutes, but you got to wait for the sigh.
Absolutely.
There you go. That's my final thought. What's yours?
Not everything you think is a fire is in fact a fire.
Ooh.
Yes. So when you're doing your after action, one of the things I recommend is did we respond in a way that was equal to the urgency that should have been applied to this particular problem? Because I would be willing to bet that 60% of the things that we treat as Sev 1 fires are in fact Sev 2 issues or less. And we create a lot more work for ourselves and a lot more urgency and a lot more stress and anxiety by simply allowing things to become Sev 1s and fires that really never were and never should have been. And I don't mean you let it go long enough that it became a fire. I mean it just never had the priority that should have got to that level.
Which is back to the fairground analogy. Everything's a klaxon, but you need more discernment to work out which ones are actually.
Agreed.
Cool. Let's leave it there.
Well, this has been another episode of The Good, the Bad, and the Techy. I'm Howard Holton. And as every week,
John Collins.
and 1 week we'll figure out how to properly do our intros and outros.
Where's the fun in it?
In the meantime, we're just going to drive our producer crazy. So with that, we'll leave you. Please like, subscribe, do all the things. We'd love to hear comments. Liking and subscribing gets the company excited. Comments get us excited. So leave comments, and if you'd like to be on an episode, reach out to either John or myself on LinkedIn for me, but wherever John's social happens to be.
Yeah, LinkedIn's fine.
So,
cool.
Talk to you next week.